Well, today I've got with me Sharon Cameron, an amazing author, one of my very favorite authors, who has recently published the book Rook, which is a phenomenal story. Yes. Which is in some ways connected to an older story. Of the Scarlet Pimpernel,
Right.
Which is a really cool story as well.
Right.
So I'm so thrilled to have Sharon with me today.
Thank you.
And this is my first author interview, I think, ever.
Oh, I didn't
this is
know
really
I was
exciting.
the first.
Yes,
This is super exciting.
So,
Okay,
and what a
great.
great person to start with.
Thank
Sharon
you.
is awesome, super cool, and really some phenomenal books. So
Thanks. Wow.
I wanted to ask you a few questions about your writing and some of the things we're doing here.
Okay, great.
All right. First of all, would you mind describing some of the the style of books that you write? You have 3 books out now,
Right.
and for those who are not yet familiar with you, but who will very
Right.
soon become very familiar with you, hopefully.
Right. Well, my first 2 books are set in 1852, 1854, Victorian era England. And, I think everything I write is probably very historical in nature, though I've discovered the more books I write that I tend to bend that a little bit. So my first 2 books, The Dark Unwinding and A Spark Unseen, are both books that are really strictly historical, but they're also very steampunk. They have a lot of elements of steampunk in them. There's a lot of Victorian science. There's a lot of pre-inventing going on in those books, but everything in those books could have been real.
Sure.
It just wasn't. And so a lot of what you're reading feels like fantasy, but it actually is either based on reality or was reality or could have been reality.
Right.
So I think those 2 are very historical, steampunk in nature. Rook is, I guess by definition, a dystopia, but it is a dystopia that takes place in a non-technological future. So I've been calling it a hystopia. It's sort of a historical dystopia, and that's my new genre. I've decided, and so I think it's also a story that is, even though it takes place 800 years in the future, it is banking on the idea that history repeats itself, and the world has started over, and we are remaking the mistakes of the past. So very much pulling from French Revolution and the relations between England and France during that time, and of course the story, The Scarlet Pimpernel, which I love. It's great, because spies and daring do and all of those wonderful things. And the new book that I'm working on, that I've just begun, I've realized is actually a space-storical. So it's going to be a historical in space. Yeah. So again, what I'm discovering about myself, and I think I'm still discovering myself as a writer, but what I am discovering about myself is I'm tending to take the history, the reality of our world, and twist it around in different ways. And so that seems to be my writing style at the moment.
Absolutely.
We'll see what happens.
Well, I'm very much enjoying it, so keep it up.
Good, thanks.
And I can't wait to hear the space historical
Yes.
story as well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, my next question for you is, what really got you into writing? What made you start this journey of being an author?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I was, as a child, as a teen, I was a voracious reader. I read everything. And I read everything and then I read it again, which was usually when I loved something, and I still do that. I read it over and over. I've probably read Lord of the Rings, I would say over 40 times in my life.
Wow.
There was a time where I read it twice a year, like clockwork. I just read it all the time. So reading was something that was hugely important to me, and writing is something that never occurred to me. I never wrote anything as a teen unless I was assigned it in a classroom. I never took a creative writing class. I was a musician for 20-something years, and it was really actually getting into a particular era of history. I read a story about something that happened to a Scottish family in 1745 during the Jacobite Rebellion, and I was so amazed by the story. I actually became completely obsessed by it, and I even went to Scotland. I met the descendants of the people from this story, and we found out much later that my husband was a descendant of the people in the story. We didn't know it at the time, but at the time I thought, I can't believe no one has ever fictionalized what happened with this family, because it was an amazing story. So I was passing my computer one day, and I knew I had 45 minutes before I had to go do something else. And I thought, I wonder what a first chapter of that would look like. What would that even be like?
Wow.
And 45 minutes later, I had written a couple of pages of words, and I pretty much decided to change my life.
Yeah, I gotta write this.
And I decided, okay, I will keep my job and I'll keep my family. They're essential. I will keep those things, but everything else goes.
Wow.
And everything else did go. And I immediately started writing every day. I found professional organizations so I could learn the business. I started reading like a writer. I went back and read a lot. I went back and read Tolkien again. And this time thinking like a writer. Like, why do I cry at this point every time in this book? What is he doing that pulls that response from me? So I really just decided to go after it.
Yeah.
And it took me 4 years to write that first book.
Wow.
And it was worth every second of it. And so that's really how I ended up getting into writing.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that you went out to be a writer, it's the story came and found you and took possession of you and said, this must be written.
It absolutely did. It absolutely did. I can't tell you my level of obsession.
That's fantastic.
I have stacks of notebooks of my research for that first novel. They're this thick, and there are boxes of them. And I still love that story. Of course, it's not the story that's been published yet.
Right.
You know, it was not my first published novel, but it's still sitting there.
Okay. All right.
Part of my heart.
All right.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Wow. This is fantastic. I have been very impressed with your level of research, and so it's interesting to hear you talk about the sort of research that you've been doing through. I'm a book that I pick up and there's a lot of things flashing and moving in the book, but not a whole lot of substance to it. Is not a book that's going to stick with me. But as you've been, as I'm reading your writing, it grips me, and there's so much complexity to it. And this is the kind of story that, from your very first novel, really draws you in. I have to say that as a reader and as an avid reader, someone who loves storytelling, and I've always been analytical about my storytelling because I want to know why I love this book so much, kind of like you're saying with Tolkien. And so as I read books, I always want to see if I can figure them out and piece them apart. I'm enjoying them on multiple levels, both the story for the sake of the story, but also for the puzzle of it all. And I have to say, with your novels, there have been so many moments where I've been so much on my toes because I didn't know what was going to happen next.
I love that.
And that's not something that happens to me very often.
I love that.
And it's made me a little bit crazy, actually, a few times.
That's wonderful.
But I
like making you crazy.
Yes, it's been absolutely gripping. So I've been, there are moments when I have my suspicions about a character, and then when that pans out in the end, I'm thinking, yes, I got one of those things right. But there's so many moments when I'm like, I don't know what's going to come next, and that makes it so rich and so.
I'm glad you think so. I mean, I like a complex story personally, and that's probably the kind of story I will always write because I do like writing things that feel real. I mean, even if it's a fantasy, and I don't mean to keep going back to Tolkien, but the reason I loved Tolkien so much, even though I don't read a huge amount of fantasy, with creatures and that kind of thing, is that it was so deep. The history that he made up was so deep. It was so complex underneath that it felt like life to me. Life is complex. Real life is not one simple thing that follows the other. And I think he made me believe in that story because it was complex. And I think that's why I want to write a story like that, because that is what I am drawn in when I feel like this world I'm entering is real. Even if I know it didn't happen, I feel like it could have happened. Or maybe it did happen and nobody knows. And so I think that complexity is what makes it feel like real life to me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, as you're developing your writing, you've talked about all the research you've done, and it took you 4 years for your first story to be completely told.
Yeah.
How do you go about planning the stories? Now that you've written a few and you've gotten the pattern down, maybe? I don't know if you've got a process now or if it's different every time.
It's an ever-evolving process, I think. I think one of the reasons that very first novel, your first novel is always such a learning experience, but I think one of the reasons it took me 4 years to write is because I did not start with a complete plan. I knew what the beginning was, I knew how it ended, but I really didn't plan out the middle.
Right.
Therefore, there were hundreds of pages, that I worked on that I didn't end up using. So I did learn from that novel that I need to start with a plan, with a plot chain of events, and I don't usually do that in a really formal outline form. I tend to sit down and write a really detailed synopsis of what I think is going to happen, and sometimes, it's nothing I want anyone else to see. It's and then this happens, and this happens, and then this happens, and then he goes over there, and this happens, but it just gives me a plan for the book so that I have a basic idea of where my turning points are in the story, where the climax is, and how we end. But saying that, I have to say I've never actually written a book that ended up resembling the synopsis that I started with. I always change it, and it's because once you get into the story and you understand your setting and you understand the characters that have grown out of this setting, when you get down to that level, you can realize so much better what your characters would do with that situation and what the implications of that situation would be for them.
Yes.
And so what I come up with when I'm writing organically is always way better than what I brainstormed. But if I don't do that brainstorming first, I write hundreds of pages that I have no time. But I have no time, to write hundreds of pages that I'm not going to use. Yes. So it keeps me from going off on a tangent.
Way too far off.
Right. But I think it's really important to allow that to be flexible.
Absolutely.
For the story to take its
and for the characters
shape.
to be real.
Right. For them to grow. Right.
I've had in my limited writing, I've had a similar experience, and I've actually talked with Courtney a little bit about that as well. The idea that the characters have to be true, and if they're not, then the story isn't. Even if it goes where I want it to go, it's not doing what I want it to do.
Because ultimately, plots are great, and I love an intricate, complex plot. I love it. But it's really about the character and that plot happening to that character.
Absolutely.
And how that character changes because of their situation.
Absolutely.
So that's what story's about.
Absolutely. And a book that does that is going to wind up being a good book. And that's,
I hope so.
I think, part of the reason why I absolutely love your book is your characters are so rich.
Thank you.
They really, really are phenomenal.
Thank you.
And speaking of characters, you have very strong female characters in your stories. And as these heroes who stand up and are and yet they're being sort of examples, I think, to our young readers. Would you say how do you think that what is the importance of strong female characters in literature for young adults
Yeah,
today?
I think that whether a character is male or female, actually, as a child reading, I experienced things in books that I could have never experienced in my life. I think that's the importance of reading, that when I'm reading about a character and they are presented with this choice, I'm also making that choice with them. I'm exploring the consequences of that choice. Whether they choose what I would have chosen or not, we're exploring those consequences. So I think now, as a writer, when I go back and I write my characters and I think about the readers who are going to read them, I think a lot of times what I end up doing is writing a character that does the things I wish I could have done.
Sure.
And I'm not talking about sword fighting or exploring the creepy house, but I wish I could have done all those things. But I think it's more about making the choices that I wish I had made, or being the person that I wish I could have been had I been 40 years old in a 15 or 16-year-old's body, if I had had all of those experiences. So I think that it's important to have those kinds of characters that are presented with choices And the great thing is that those might be the choices I wish I had made, or I wish I could have been more like that at that age. But the reader doesn't have to agree with that. And that's the great part about story. But I think it's great to have the question presented. Is this the way you would react in that situation? Could you do it? Could you be that brave? Could you be that strong? Should you be?
Right.
You know, I think that's why it's important to present those characters, male or female. It's all about the choices that they're making. Yeah.
Your characters are faced with some very difficult choices. Oh, no spoilers.
That's what we're supposed to. That's what we're supposed to do to them.
Excellent,
yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Well, very good. Well, another thing I want to talk to you about, putting books aside for the moment, but not entirely.
Okay.
We are planning the Southeastern Young Adult Book Festival, and you are one of our consultants on that, and I am so thrilled to bring a Young Adult Book Festival to my hometown of Murfreesboro.
Yes.
And this is absolutely wonderful. I was hoping that you would maybe comment on SEAYBA and what it is and what we're hoping to accomplish with it.
So the SEAYBA Book Festival is a young adult book festival that is going to bring, we hope, around between 30 and 40 authors to the Murfreesboro area to meet with kids, to do panels, to do talks, to sign books. And I think the importance of that, and the reason that I am excited about this and that I'm devoting my time to this is because, you know, I think I told you that I was one of those kids that had no idea that I wanted to be an author. And even though I was a voracious reader, as a kid, it really never occurred to me that writers were real people, and which is funny to say, but it's kind of true. You don't think about them as people that you would know, who would live in your town, or that you might run into in the grocery store, or you know, like like they drive cars, you know, and things like that. It's funny to think of, but I didn't really know that, and I wonder if I had had an author visit, if I had had the opportunity to listen to an author speak, or to have them sign my book, to exchange words with them, to see them in person. I wonder how that would have affected my choices, and I have no regrets actually for the things that I did in my life, but I think it would have opened my eyes to some things that could have been potentially life-changing for me, and that's what I want for Middle Tennessee. I want the kids and the community, everyone, it really doesn't matter what age you are, to be able to come in and talk about books, discover new books, and to have their eyes open to all the possibilities that are out there. You know, sometimes we limit ourselves because we just don't know what's there.
Absolutely.
So I am thrilled to help bring this to Middle Tennessee. I think it will be life-changing for some kids.
Absolutely. Well, we're very thrilled I'm thrilled to be a part of it and part of the planning, and definitely very excited both to come and to have all my students come. I'm really looking forward to bringing young people to meet amazing authors like Sharon Cameron.
I can't wait to see them.
What are some of the best experiences you've had in meeting young people? I mean, you never imagined that you would be an author for a very long time, and then you became an author, and back in the day you didn't imagine authors as real people. Now you are an author, you're a real person, and you've really had these interactions. What's that been like?
Well, here's what I would compare it to. As a reader kid, you know how it is when you find someone that likes the same book as you, and all of a sudden on some level you're best friends because you have this thing where you both love this story.
I believe that's how C.S. Lewis defines friendship.
Oh, right.
Say, wait, you love that too? Yeah,
I think that's exactly right. I haven't even thought of that, but it's so true. And I think what has been so amazing that I never actually anticipated about being an author is meeting people who totally love the same things I do, you know, who I love this part of your book, and I'm like, me too. We're best friends now, you know, like, and so it's like it's kindred spirits. It's an Anna Green Gables thing, you know. It's kindred spirits. You just suddenly discover they're all over the world. They're everywhere. I had no idea, you know. Dark Unwinding has just come out in several different languages.
Oh yes,
and so now I'm getting
congratulations.
Thank you. And so now I'm getting emails from people in Italy, from people in France, you know, And they're everywhere. It's not just the United States. So I think it's been that feeling of kinship and the way story can connect so many different people.
Yes.
I think that's been an amazing part of being an author.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I am so thrilled that I've been able to meet you. The first time I met you was the first meeting with the SEAYBA Book Fest.
Right.
And I had never read any of your stuff, and I said, wow, that's an author over there, how cool. And then I read your book and I was like, oh my goodness! How did I not go up and shake her hand and be like, oh, you're amazing!
I loved your live tweeting of reading my books. It was so fun. I was like, wait till you get to this part.
Yeah. Oh man, that was really hard to hold back the spoilers because I was just screaming the whole time, and I needed somebody to scream to.
I love that. See, kindred spirits.
That's right. That's right. Oh, it was wonderful. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so very much, and thank you for coming and interviewing with me, and I really appreciate it. And make sure that you check out Sharon Cameron's books and that you get pumped up for the SEAYBA Book Fest because it's going to be phenomenal. We're going to have Sharon and so many other wonderful authors there. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
And thank you.